New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy now says that some schools in his state can start the year remotely, softening his plan to have public schools bring students back into the classroom this fall.
Both public and non-public schools must certify to the Department of Education that they are able to meet the health and safety standards necessary to resume in-person instruction. Districts that cannot meet all the health and safety standards for safe in-person instruction will begin their school year in an all-remote fashion.
The state still hopes to reopen all of its schools at some point, but a lot of teachers are worried. Here's how one of them is getting ready for this unusual school year.
I have colleagues in their 20s making wills. I have a colleague who's talking about having her husband and her toddler move out of their house because she doesn't want to worry about exposing him. I want nothing more than to be back in school. But when we're dealing with a virus that we don't know a lot about, it's scary. My name is Sarah Gross. I am a teacher in New Jersey. I teach high school English, 9th and 12th grade. And right now, our students will be divided in half. Half of them will be in the A group, and they'll come on Mondays and Tuesdays. Half will be in the B group. They'll come on Thursdays and Fridays. And Wednesdays, the building will be closed for cleaning, and everyone will be online doing remote learning that day. My students sit at tables, usually 3 or 4 kids together. So I have a huge classroom library that essentially serves the whole school. My first thought when the guidelines came out and when the governor gave the press conference and said no small groups, no shared supplies, was what's going to happen with my classroom library. And over the next few weeks, I just started thinking about, like, well, wait, what is my classroom going to look like? So I started writing letters to Governor Murphy at probably like the halfway point in July. It describes a day in the life of my classroom. And I bolded everything that probably couldn't happen, starting with walking in the building with coffee and a water bottle. My students read physical copies of the newspaper every day. I don't think we're going to be able to do that because they share them. And I know they're not going to be able to do the collaborative learning that they normally do, where they work in groups and I move around the room with them. They're just going to sit facing forward, listening to a lecture all day. Teachers have always bought things for their classrooms. You know, it's one thing when we say we're not funded and I'm buying my own classroom library books, but it's a completely different thing when we're talking, you know, a pandemic. I have colleagues who have purchased hair caps. I have colleagues who are looking into building plexiglass barriers or PVC piping with shower curtains. When the Department of Education and the governor released their guidance for reopening, myself, many of my colleagues across the state, we immediately downloaded it and started reading it, and you know, the text messages started flying back and forth. So I quick set up a Google survey, posted it on social media, questions started pouring in. This is a document of educator concerns that I started right after the state released the guidelines for reopening schools. Everything from, you know, basic, really common questions like how will immune-compromised staff or students be accommodated, to, you know, high school teachers, middle school teachers were asking if a fight breaks out, will teachers have to get in between students? And kindergarten teachers are wondering how they're going to comfort a crying child from 6 feet away. So we're up to 382 questions at this point. If you look at what's happening, you know, already in southern states that have reopened, I think every teacher sort of sees the writing on the wall. So for me, planning has looked like starting to sketch out my lessons and how I can convert them to videos. Good morning, freshmen. So I'm here to do a couple of book talks for you. If you're looking for an independent reading book, it means that I'll be able to sort of flip on a dime. I can't wait to get back in my classroom. Every teacher I know says the same thing. But for my colleagues who are high risk, it's making them question if they can stay in teaching. And I have a number of colleagues around the country who have handed in resignation letters already.
The NBA and the NHL aren't the only bubbles in town. Vassar College trying something similar, telling students once they're on campus, they won't be able to leave. So what will this fall be like for them? NBC News correspondent Savannah Sellers takes a look.
Every fall, college students look forward to returning to their campus bubble and reuniting with classmates. But this year, that bubble will be more than just a cultural clique. At least one college, Vassar in Poughkeepsie, New York, isn't allowing students to leave campus. No part-time jobs, visiting family, or eating in town this semester. Students have to stay in the bubble, and they're cautiously optimistic.
I really want us to be taking the most precautions that we can, and as long as they do that, I'm really happy to be there, and I'm really comfortable, and I want to trust the administration.
Going back to campus, and I'm super excited to be going back. Vassar has taken the right decision by getting us back, because most students did want to come back.
Vassar's roughly 2,400 students are normally required to live in campus housing. The difference this year, they can't leave campus unless there's an emergency.
I feel like a lot of people are making a much bigger fuss about, or think it's a much bigger deal to be living in a bubble, but Vassar is already a bubble. That's what they don't realize, is that Vassar is already a bubble. We already live in this bubble. It's not going to be much different, I don't think.
Vassar's evolving reopening plan will also include face masks, physical distance, testing, and protocols for isolation, and will cycle through 4 phases of the fall campus experience. Now, the idea of a bubble is not unique to Vassar.
The new sports fans across the country have been waiting for a restart of the NBA season in a safety bubble.
Most notably, the NBA bubble is an isolation zone in Orlando, Florida, where 22 NBA teams are living, eating, and playing basketball. Players are not permitted to leave the Disney campus, and they're tested daily for COVID-19. And it seems to be working. No single player or member of the bubble has tested positive since the season began. I spoke with the lead author of this study, Dr. David Paul. He's a professor at the Yale School of Public Health.
According to your study, there is essentially a best practice for reopening colleges in the fall.
What we found was that, yes, indeed, there is a safe way for students to return to college in the fall. And the key element of that plan is screening for the SARS-CoV-2 virus at high frequency, like every 2 or 3 days, using a rapid, inexpensive test coupled with strict, vigilant adherence to social distancing and other basic prevention practices.
Vassar's president, Dr. Elizabeth Bradley, also a global health expert, weighed in on whether or not she believes there's a one-size-fits-all college reopening plan.
A viral threat is complicated, and the right strategy depends on what's the location, what's the size of the college, what's the culture, what kind of capacities do they have. And so it's very important for us not to get focused on a single strategy like testing.
So from what you found in your study, would isolating students like the current plan at Vassar is to do help?
Our recommendation is a plan of very high frequency screening coupled with those social distancing and isolating capabilities. And I'm a little concerned that the plan currently does depend on everything that could possibly go wrong to go right. I have engineers build bridges to withstand several times the weight that they expect to travel over those bridges. A bridge that can only withstand the weight that you expect is called a house of cards.
In this case, an outbreak within the bubble could bring the house of cards down, but students are hoping things go smoothly.
I'm quite an optimist, so I am hoping for the best.
The Cherokee County School District in Georgia brought thousands of students back to the classroom this month. Now 59 people there have tested positive for the coronavirus, and nearly 1,200 are in quarantine. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joins me now. Sam, what do we know? What happened here?
Allison, good afternoon. Certainly a turbulent start to the school year for the Cherokee County school community. Let's go back a second. They started last Monday. Within 24 hours of that, parents already receiving a letter in one school that a second grader had contracted COVID-19. Soon after that, it ballooned, Allison, to at least 59 people within that community, which led to almost 1,200 under quarantine. And now we have some breaking news to get to. A second high school, Woodstock High School there, within that school district, is closing its doors and doing just virtual learning through August 31st. That's as of today after class. That becomes the second high school now after Etowah High School to do the exact same thing. So hundreds of students now being told they can only go and learn at home because of outbreaks within the school confines. That's the latest. And Allison, epidemiologists have been saying from the beginning, wear masks and social distance. Those are the two keys to being able to prevent the transmission of COVID-19. And in a state like Georgia, where community transmission is so high, it has to be done. And if it's not done, you're seeing outbreaks. We have seen, Allison, visual evidence of kids crammed into hallways, not wearing masks. So it's a bit speculative to say what caused this, but it's fair to assume that has some role in it. And I will add this, Allison, the superintendent of Cherokee County did come out here and tell parents this: as your superintendent, I wear a mask whenever I cannot social distance. We know all parents do not believe the scientific research that indicates masks are beneficial, but I believe and I see masks as an important measure to help us keep schools open. So he's almost putting it at the feet of parents to make the right decision for their kids. But there is no requirement at the end of the day, Allison, for these students to be wearing masks inside of school hallways.
So Sam, is the school district making any major changes because of this outbreak? It sounds like, at least on the mask front, they are not.
Here's where this gets interesting, because the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, has said, regardless of what he's seen happen, there is going to be no mask requirements. Now you have individual superintendents like this one in Cherokee County saying the exact same thing. It's going to be an onus on the families and not dictated that way. What's really interesting as well is just in terms of the guidelines for what would trigger quarantines, it varies based on county. So there is no overarching statewide edict on this. There's tons of autonomy on the local level. And so far, at least for Cherokee County, the changes that they've made are closing down the schools that have been deeply impacted. I mentioned Woodstock. They have 14 students so far who have tested positive, 15 that are pending. At the time right now, there's 289 folks within that school that are quarantining. They said that could be much larger if some of those pending results come back positive.
Sam, I can only imagine how concerned some parents are right now. Are some of them reconsidering sending their kids back to school? What are you hearing?
That is a great question. We talked to one mom from Woodstock, ironically, before today's announcement about what she was doing with her daughter.
Wow.
The daughter was pulled out of school this past Monday. She says, I regret the fact that we took the school system at face value when they said they had this under control, and now she's out of class. Here's what that woman, Hillary Porterfield, had to say.
I decided that even though she was going to have to drop some courses, her safety was much more important, and the district just wasn't making the decisions that needed to be made. So I needed to step in and do what was best for my daughter.
To expand on that just a little bit, Allison, her daughter had said, she was really looking forward to taking some AP courses, an intro to law course that would prepare her for the sort of colleges she wants to apply to. That's not an option online. We're going to find out right now what colleges are doing with very different situations in different states, but that's something that's weighing into the calculus right now for a lot of these families.
Yeah, difficult decisions to make when kids are trying to do all the things they need to get into college. Sam, wild situation there. Thank you for updating us with the very latest there in Georgia. Auckland, New Zealand's largest city, back on lockdown after recording the country's first coronavirus cases in more than 3 months. NBC News medical correspondent Dr. John Torres joins me now. Dr. John, a lot of New Zealanders thought that they were in the clear. No new cases in 102 days. Here in the U.S., we are still seeing tens of thousands of new cases every day. How can we ever expect to get a hold on this?
And Allison, you have to remember, first off, that they've gone 102 days without cases. So they basically shut their country down for a while. They finally reopened their country once they started not having cases and got to what they call level 1, stage 1, which means that everything is essentially back to normal. And after that 102 days, they ended up having these 4 cases that they're still trying to figure out exactly where they came from. But they think they might have come from kind of a breakdown at the borders of getting people in there and having them quarantined for 14 days, which is their requirement. But you have to remember, too, it's an island, 5 million people. It's easy to isolate, easy to quarantine. That's a lot harder to do here in a country of 350 million people that is spread geographically across such a big area. And so we are seeing here in the U.S. that there are some places that we're having a hard time getting a handle on how to get these under control. And like Sam was talking about earlier, one of the big things is making sure that people understand how important those masks are, how important that social distancing is, how those are going to be the keys to making sure that we get things opened up again and we can keep them open, Allison.
Dr. John, we're focusing on schools this week. We know several schools in the South already have students back in quarantine after the schools briefly reopened. We saw what happened when states brought back indoor dining. Cases went up. If indoor dining isn't safe, how are schools safe to reopen?
And I think you're talking almost a little bit of apples and oranges to a certain extent, because with indoor dining, you don't quite have the control you would have in school. Although there is the argument that especially as students get older, they might not be listening to their guidelines as much as they should. And so it is more like the indoor dining areas where they're going to congregate and get back with their friends. But one important thing to remember, too, is that right now, and this is the thing I tell a lot of parents and a lot of school officials, is we need to be flexible. We need to be very creative. We need to be very patient. And it might be that we're opening up schools for 3 weeks and then shutting them down for a couple weeks and then reopening them again. This is going to be hard on students, on parents, on teachers, on everybody, but we've never been through this before. So we're trying these new things that we think are going to keep us safe. We're doing the best we can to make sure those safety measures are met first and foremost. But once we start seeing cases, we're going to have to be very flexible and creative in how we handle those cases. And so, you're right. Indoor dining is causing a lot of issues. Indoor schools could start causing issues as well. I think to a certain extent, they're a little bit different, but we need to keep an eye on it, Allison.
Mm-hmm. Dr. John, we're also getting some new information on masks. There's a recent study that says not all face coverings are created equal, and that neck gaiters might be worse than no mask at all. I hate to hear that because I have my Steelers neck gaiter ready to go this fall, whether there's football or not. Why are those potentially not as effective?
And Allison, I think, we all have neck gaiters, and I use this when I go out mountain bike riding. And it's one of the things, if you look at the study itself, it was not a study to look at masks per se. It was a study to look at ways to look at masks, at outlining different scientific principles they could use to try and find out. So when it came to masks, they found out, yes, N95 masks, we know these are the best, and these work really well. But they also found out that surgical masks and these cotton masks that have 2 or more layers work really well as well. But then they came to neck gaiters. They actually only tested one neck gaiter, and they're calling it a fleece neck gaiter, but it was actually polyester/spandex, which is exactly what this is. And they're saying because we can breathe through it, which is one of the reasons we use it when we're working out, is that breathing lets the virus out there, lets the respiratory particles get out. And in fact, it might even break them down a little more and let them float in the air a little bit longer. But might being the operative word here, we're not exactly sure. Plus, we don't know what happens if you double up the layers of the neck gaiter and wear it that way like I do when I'm mountain bike riding. I make sure there's at least 2 layers on there. And so the jury's still out, and some experts are saying, hold on, wait a minute, neck gaiters still might have some use there. But the main thing to get out of this, I think, is that, number one, you want to wear masks. Number two, you want to wear masks that protect other people and protect you as well. But you also want to social distance, especially when you're out doing things like running, jogging, walking, or even cycling like I do. You want to make sure that you're keeping away from other people, even if you have these masks and neck gaiters in place.
All right, so Dr. John, I'm going to be that crazy-looking super fan with my mask on top of my gaiter, but at least I'll be ready.
And then you just need your face shield and your goggles. You'll be good to go.
Totally. I'm going to look like something out of ET, but hey, look, we know how important it is to protect ourselves, to protect other people. You've been saying it, Dr. John. Wear the masks, wash your hands, social distance.
That's the 3. Those are the 3 things.
Thanks, Dr. John.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.